Next project here on the KTM is to rebuild these forks because they leak like a sieve like I showed you in the last video. And I have a set of Racetech gold valves to go in this. There's the part number. It's for a 2000 KTM 300 EXC. All right, so I just take and loosen these ones. And on this bike, the fork cap's a 24 millimeter. So I'll just take, with this one tight and this one loose, it gives you like a little fork clamp. So you can loosen that up. So now that it's loose, I'm gonna take the fork out, take it over to the bench, and we'll start working on it. All right, this part's messy. You're gonna want a drain pan. Now that you got your fork cap loose, we gotta take that fork cap off and drain all the oil into the oil pan. So now that you've got that loose, you can drop your upper fork tube all the way down and start pouring out the oil. And I'm not expecting there to be a lot in this one because these forks were leaking so bad. And moving your tube up and down helps get all of it out. Next, you want to clamp lightly the chrome part of your fork tube in your vise with some padded vise jaws, plastic or nylon, or if you don't have those, you can wad up like a bunch of rags and stick them in there. And you're going to want to put your drain pan under this end of the fork tube, because if you don't, there's going to be stuff dripping out of that. All right, next we got to pull this cap off and get the spring out. So on most bikes with upside down forks, there's little wrench flats on this inner piece that you can grab a hold of. On this bike, it happens to be a 21 mil or a 7/8. And sometimes it's really difficult to get this spring away from it. But you put one wrench on that, and you get another wrench on your top cap, and break them loose. Okay, there we go. So now that you got the top cap off, you can pull this inner rod, which is for your rebound adjuster. You can pull that out, and you can pull the spring. Set that aside. So this next part's kind of tricky. You got to take your compression valving out, which is threaded to an inner tube that's in here. So there's a special tool that they sell that you can get in from this side and hold that inner tube while you loosen this and back it out. What I found works 99 times out of 100 is just a little battery impact, and you can just kind of bump the trigger and it'll zip it out. So we'll do that right now, I'll show you. So just kind of hold it down here on the end where it's sticking out and kind of... Now you'll want to have a drain pan when you take this out because oil's going to come out of there. And right there is all your compression valving. You see this one has like bits of O-ring and trash jammed in it. So guarantee this wasn't working worth shit. From the other end, you can grab a hold of your valve stack, you can feel it, and pull it out. Have some rags because it'll be messy. This is that tube I was talking about that it threads into, this guy right here. We'll let that drain for a second and set it on the bench. The next step in disassembly is to pry this dust seal out of the way. So I just take a small flat blade screwdriver and get it in between the fork leg and the dust seal and just kind of twist it. And work your way around and work it out of there a little bit at a time. Now once you do that, there'll be a locking ring of some kind in here that actually holds the fork seal in. Sometimes they're a little round one, sometimes they're a snap ring. You just have to look in yours and see which one it is. Most of the time you can get them out with a flat blade pretty easily. Snap ring variety. There you go. That guy's out of there. To remove the fork seal from in there, you just run this back and forth like a slide hammer. Hear that? You just give it some wax and it'll come out. There it is. So this is the tube, the upper leg, and here's your chrome lower leg, and here's right here's the fork seal, and then the backup ring for the fork seal, and then the two bushings, which we're going to replace these because they're worn, and anytime you're in here, it's an extra 30 bucks or something, just buy them and put them in. So we got to get all these guys off of here. The first one that comes off is this inner bushing, and there's usually a split in it. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, there's a split there. So if you don't have fingernails, it makes it hard. You just get in there and kind of spread it apart, and it comes right off. Then the outer bushing slides right off. Then the backup ring. Then your fork seal. And if it's a fork seal you're planning on keeping, don't drag it over these sharp edges because you'll cut it. Wrap them in electrical tape first, then you can pull this off if you're going to reuse that seal. like if you're just changing the valving or something. This little guy is the compression valve stack. All these little shims underneath this valve head right here are what we're going to change out. We're also going to change the valve head with that Racetech Gold valve. Now these are aluminum thread, so you have to be super careful when you're taking them apart not to strip them out, dink them up, etc., etc. It's a 17 mil. I use this little shorty ratchet because it's aluminum, and there is Loctite on it, so it won't come off super easy. But see, there you go. These are torqued to like 2.5 foot-pounds or something. Silly, silly small. So here's the nut, and inside that there's a little spring. Set that aside. And then this is just a check. Then here's the valve. This is the actual compression valve. And then all this right here is the actual valve stick. All these little shims are what actually dictates how stiff or soft the actual compression valving in your bike is going to be. Set those aside. Next, you just got to clean the crap out of this. With suspension and fork work and shock work, you can't be clean enough. Alright, so I built my valve stack up. I just put it on this O-ring pick so they keep them in order, keep them from getting lost. And it really helps to have a set of digital dial calipers that you can do millimeters in, because that's what Racetech's going to give you the specs. And there's all these shims that come in a pack. You'll have extras when you're done, but they're different thicknesses and different outside diameter. And they'll give you a list in what order to put them in, so you got to measure them and build your stack. So now that we got this valve all cleaned up, we have our valve stack that we built, so we got to put that small side down, on this bike anyway, on here. So I just put it on this O-ring pick so I can kind of hook the end in here and keep it from all dropping out on the ground. Now that our valve stack's on there, we put our gold valve on, and it goes with the very flat side down on this one. Your gold valve will come with instructions that'll tell you what to do for your bike. So that guy goes down like that. And then gold valve Racetech gives you a new check. So then the check goes on, then the spring, and then the nut. And it has to be real clean for a dab of Loctite. And just a tiny bit. You don't want any of the Loctite down in the valving or in the compression adjuster, and that's probably too much. And this gets bolted down. And on this bike, it's literally like 2.5 foot-pounds or something. It's almost nothing. And it really helps if you hold the valve with the check up against that spring as you tighten it, to keep the spring from going inside the check. I figured that out in the last one. So again, this is like 2.5 foot-pounds. It's not a whole lot. Click, click. Put a new O-ring on the piston, a new copper washer for the base, and a new O-ring for the base, and you're done. I highly recommend, if you're mechanically inclined and you're not afraid to dig into a set of forks, that you give the race valve or the Racetech Gold valves a try. So I actually found what those little pieces of rubber were. They weren't really rubber, because these forks had no oil in them. They had no compression or rebound dampening, so this got bottomed out so hard it came up and shaved little bits of plastic off of this. I guess it's the bump stop. But that's what those little pieces were from. And then, as they say, assembly is the opposite of disassembly, right? We're going to go in with this inner tube. There's a little step down here you can line it up with. Then the compression valve goes in. Put a little lube on the O-ring, a little bit of fork oil. And that guy goes in there. You kind of work it in a little bit. And then that gets buzzed in with the impact. Alright, so we're going to put the fork seals on, and these real sharp edges will cut the new seal if you're not careful. So I just take, they make special tools for this called the seal bullet and all that stuff. You need a 99-cent roll of duct tape or electrical tape. I just put one layer of electrical tape over the sharp area, and that's plenty. You take your new dust seal, put a little bit of grease on the inside of it. You don't have to go nuts, just a nice smear, light smear of grease. Helps keep the forks from sticking. And that goes on. Just be careful when you work it on here, you don't catch any of the lip. Next is your snap ring, then your fork seal. Take a little dollop of grease and just wipe the inside of it. Pay attention to the direction of these seals. The side with the spring always goes towards the upper tube. Then your seal backup ring goes on. Then you take your electrical tape off. Make sure you wipe off any adhesive. Then your fork seal bushings go on. First your outer one. Then the inner one. You spread it apart just like you took it off. And now here's the part where everybody says you need a fork seal driver, but you don't need a fork seal driver. You just need some electrical tape. So I'll take the rag, spray it with a little contact cleaner, wipe off the grease so that the tape will stick. And then you wrap this around till it's just barely smaller than the size of the seal, all in one row. So you get your electrical tape around here so it's just smaller than the size of this seal. You take your upper fork tube, after it's been cleaned, slide it over the bushings, and then you're going to ram it against that electrical tape, kind of like a slide hammer. Then your snap ring goes in, all the way into the groove. Once you've done that, all that should be left is your dust wiper. So you take your dust wiper and just kind of slowly work it around the tube into your upper tube, fork leg. And try not to get it started crooked, because then it makes it tough. And then you do the same thing. You wrap some more electrical tape on and ram it home once it's started. Next, all you got to do is fill it full of fluid to your factory specification. You'll have to check your factory service manual for that, because every bike I've done is different. They all have a different level, they all have a different method for how they're supposed to be filled, so you can usually find it online too if you just Google it. Alright, once you've bled them, you can stick them back on the bike. So that's the front suspension done. So the parts came in for the shock. I got the Race Tech gold valve for it and then the shaft seal. So we'll take this thing apart and we'll come back to the bench once it's apart and in pieces for the gold valve install. We did have to finagle some tools to get this top cap off because I didn't have the right one. But if you just put one of these pins out of the one kit in the hole and then grab it with the spanner wrench, you can get it off. So, see you in a second.
Okay, so when we go to put the seal on, these edges are really sharp, and we want to make sure we don't mess up our brand new seal, because that'd be sad. So we have just a piece of Ziploc bag that we cut the edges off so we don't have the seams. Okay, so when we go and put this seal on, we want to make sure we protect on these super sharp edges. So we try to use a bag, try to use tape to protect these sharp edges, and every time we went to put this seal on, it just literally shredded them and packed the seals full of this plastic garbage. So we ended up just putting tape around the top threads and then greasing this up a whole bunch and giving it hell.
So like you guys saw with the forks, we got the new gold valve and then all the shim stacks built out of the pack of shims they give you. You got to measure all of them and build the shim stack and some new seals. So we'll stick this all together on the shock and bring you guys back. So these end caps originally come with a goofy bolt from KTM. You have to use a special tool like a little hypodermic needle to fill. So we just drilled and tapped this for 1/8 inch NPT. And then I bought an 1/8 inch NPT Schrader valve to screw into it. So after you get the cap screwed on, the manual says to fill this with 20 to 30 psi of nitrogen. So I got my nitrogen filler right here, and then what you can't see under the bench is the nitrogen bottle with a regulator. And this is why we went to the Schrader valve, because I'm not about to buy the $300 special tool to fill one shock. All right, put the spring on. It might, but oh.
We
need the
piece of
washers.
plastic, yeah. Over the washers.
The washers, where are the washers?
They should have been with the there they are. Ooh, I wouldn't put that one on there. Yep.
Okay. Money. All right, so there's forks and rear shock. That's suspension done. That's one more step on the way to making this thing run. Big thanks to Alan for coming over and helping me out. I'd never done a shock before, and he's done a couple of them. So I think the next one will be the engine. I got all the parts and pieces, so we'll catch you on the next one.